no blue is not in her.
Welcome to No Occasion to Shout. So, unfortunately, Robin, these guys want us apparently to talk more politics.
Who's these guys?
Our audience. They don't like the cartoon stuff.
Really?
As much as the political stuff. So, what happened recently is there is a quarterback named Colin Kaepernick. He's not a very good quarterback. Robin doesn't know any of this.
I don't know any of this, but I have heard the name Kaepernick because he's the guy he was the taking the knee guy, right?
He was the taking the knee guy, right? So the taking the knee guy just got a sponsorship with Nike.
Okay.
Nike put out this ad, which was just a picture of him and his face, kind of dim lit, and on it in kind of small letters with the Nike check mark. It said, fight for what you believe in, even if you lose everything. Or something like that.
Has Kaepernick lost everything? Or is he doing quite nicely, thank you?
I mean, I don't think he is not doing well for the knee thing. That has hurt his career. The NFL doesn't really want anything to do with him because they...
Okay, so he's essentially he's lost his job, has he?
I am actually not sure, but I do know that he's a second string QB right now on a team, and I don't think he's allowed to play if he doesn't stand and cite the anthem.
Okay.
And there's two things here. One, this is just my opinion. One, there's a contractual agreement with the NFL. He is an employer for the NFL, so he has to do what NFL tells him. But two, also, our founding father, Thomas Jefferson, I feel like would have a very big problem with the NFL saying this. Because in Thomas Jefferson's view, based on what I know about Thomas Jefferson, he would say that true patriotism would actually come from being able to burn an American flag and having the government not kill you for that act. That true patriotism for the United States comes from the act of rebellion.
But just so I'm understanding you, your first point, doesn't it, as it were, make the second point irrelevant in this context?
If we're talking about it from a legal standpoint, not if we're talking about it from a moral or a philosophical standpoint.
Well, the morality in the second point isn't affected by the fact that somebody may make a contractual agreement to do or not to do something for money.
That is true. So, anyway, what happened with this, as a sociologist's perspective might have guessed, is that there are a lot of Republicans, hardcore Republicans, that are burning all of their Nike gear on camera, on Facebook, social media, Twitter. They're burning all of their Nike gear. Kind of
stuff to do, right?
Kind of hypocritical because I do know some Republican friends who support groups that donate things to veterans who are injured, who don't have material. So the burning of the Nike gear seems to be a little bit hypocritical in that sense towards they could have given it to a homeless veteran. They contradicts their own views. From that aspect, but another thing is just...
It depends if you think... I mean, it's not a... I take your point, but it's not a contradiction if you think the symbology is...
That's true.
Has itself value, right?
That's true. I'm taking things from a material point of view. What if the symbolism of... and of course, I shared a meme about this... this modern event. We need to start doing more modern events, Robin. We're going to start doing them because they gain traction.
Yeah, you're right. My marketing folks always tell me this. And Robin, you've got to respond to something. I'm like, oh God. Yeah.
So this is trending right now, the burning of all the Nike gear. And I sent out a meme that has nothing to do with kind of what's going on, but it kind of does. It said, it was people yelling at Colin Kaepernick saying, "We fought for your right for this. We fought for your rights. Why would you do this?" and then it's these ghosts of these army soldiers, and they're saying, actually, we fought for his right to either sit or stand. And that seems to have gotten about 2,000 shares and is very popular. But I don't think it really delves into the issue. And the issue for me is that there isn't one.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, I find the whole thing is this very tiresome grandstanding, which is precisely why I find it so difficult to engage in current affairs. Because the fact is, I don't think it's quite possible to have no argument whatsoever with the fact that, in general, people have a right to sit and stand and do what they want, blah, 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 and then they voluntarily constrain their freedom for private purposes in private contracts for remuneration, which is what having a job is, right? I mean, actually, by definition. So I really just the whole thing is people using this as kind of, is it not just almost like a moral ego trip on one side or the other? I mean, which is what so much of these things evolved into. Am I missing something?
Yes. No, apparently it's if we want to be popular, we have to talk about why it's not a big deal.
All right. I kind of want to say done.
I know it is very it's not a big deal.
I mean, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
The only thing about it is that you can point out the hypocrisies of both sides. That's the only thing you can kind of do without taking a stance. I can point out the hypocrisy of the Republican side of kind of, it is their arguments, at least the arguments that they're presenting. Soldiers died for your rights. You need to stand for the pledge. It's un-American. It's unconstitutional. I can point to Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson kind of disagreeing with that. And I can point to the hypocrisy of the liberal side for caring at all because it's a private business and it's a private company. And it doesn't actually matter. Those are the...
You know what? Maybe we can say something that's actually got some value here because,
all right.
And I'm trying to come up with some. This is probably a really good example of some of the stuff I teach, drawn from Jonathan Haidt's work on moral universes, right? On the moral dimensions. So you've got conservatives for whom loyalty is inherently moral, whereas for, let's say, progressives, I'll just use that term, being loyal does not per se have any moral value. It depends entirely what you're being loyal to. So what you're seeing here with the you need to stand for the flag, stand for the anthem. That is it's an expression of loyalty, right? It's buying into the group, and in the conservative moral mindset, and obviously I'm generalizing, but in the conservative moral mindset, being able to benefit from group participation requires active loyalty to the group. So it's kind of obviously it's a kind of a two fingers up they see to their group, to their Americanism, and whereas we know what the other side is, and in both sides are doing this thing that Haidt talks about of their politics dropping out of the need to maintain a certain reputation among that part of the group, their tribe, the group that they identify with, right? So in a way, if you're on the right of this, or the conservative side, you're signaling your loyalty not only to America, but that you are maintaining your moral standing among your fellow conservatives, which, by the way, when it comes to self-interest in politics, that maintaining your moral standing among those that you identify with is kind of the number one element or component of self-interest, right? When it comes to political choices, that is a number one element of self-interest. It's not it's not actually material benefit typically, right? It's maintaining moral standing among those you identify with. And so you can see that going on in this issue really well, precisely because there's nothing else at play, right? Which is why it's such a raw example of it.
Yeah, you just explain the psychological components or reasonings why anyone would pick one of the either two sides.
Because the mistake that both sides are sharing in is to not, and I was kind of making light of this, but it's kind of a serious point, is to not paying more attention to more important things. It's good.
Yeah. But for our purposes, it's not hypocritical for us because we're trying to. There's this book, and if you guys have never read it, I would recommend it. It's called "Why Everyone Else Is Wrong."
Why everyone else is wrong? So you cut out there. Why everyone else is wrong?
Yes, Why Everyone Else Is Wrong is the name of the book. It's a good book. So I'm going to piggyback off of that by saying I just went back to class for the first day, and my teacher for my English 312 class, he put up on the board two numbers, 1680 and 1948, I believe, were the two numbers. And he said, I'm going to read you a poem, two different poems, and your job as a class is to try to figure out which is from 1680 and which is from 1912 or 1948. So the first poem he read was about sex. And it was it said the C word in it, and it was kind of a gruesome poem. And the second poem was about, I don't even remember, I think it was about gold and the beauty of it. It used a lot of metaphors. It was a very metaphorical poem. So I sat back as a sociologist without answering the question. I was kind of just listening first to other people's responses. And one person, I had two different sides, and this is a conservative point of view and a liberal point of view. I could immediately see this. So one person said that he believes that the sex poem was from the 20th century. And his reasoning for that was because it doesn't sound like, he said, we are very progressive now, we're getting very progressive, and back in the 1914, I bet they wouldn't have been even that progressive then, but I bet it's probably there. No way it's all the way back from 1600. And he had never read Shakespeare.
I was just thinking.
But it was kind of a conservative reasoning. The fact that we are so much more morally pure than they were back then. And then another person made the opposite argument. They said, I think because they were so reserved and so pure in that age, the literature might be more sexual because of repression, and repression would lead to perversion type of argument. Those were very interesting context. I cheated. I didn't cheat, but I answered the question, and I said I believe that the poem, I knew which poems they were right away, but or the first one, but I knew the poem about sex was from the 16th century or 17th century because of the couplets and the rhyme scheme. But I thought that was, at least those two students' point of view, was very interesting way to look at it. And it showed kind of a conservative versus maybe a liberal mindset on how things were back then. Because I feel like conservatives like to think that we are very sexualized now. And back in the past, it was more loyalty.
Which is very interesting because that conservative obsession with sexuality and its overtness, you can find it all the way through history. And in these peaks of, oh my God, so and each age thinks it's worse in its own age, right? But everyone's always been thinking that, at least in modern history. Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. Yeah. My teacher then went on to talk about he took a kind of postmodern stance on it, which I thought was interesting. I take an evolutionary stance. Whichever is the best is the one that's going to reproduce, and not the best, but I don't know. History is interesting from the standpoint of conservatism versus liberalism. You could argue it's the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie over and over in history again. Where
Very Marxist.
you could argue there's lots of different ways. I don't know. College is liberal. There's definitely a liberal bias in college.
Ugh. I mean, it's like right now it's off the charts. And let's call it leftist, because I get uncomfortable with
let's
the
call
use
it leftist.
of the word liberal.
Right.
You know,
right.
I'm a true liberal. You know,
you are a true liberal.
This leftism that's going on in this hard authoritarian leftism that's going on campus.
Would you say you're like a John Stuart Mill type of liberal, or like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
That's what I would classify as you too. You as too. So that's interesting. So historical. We would just talk about the historical context. Can you think of an example in history that you would equate this Nike, the burning of the shoes with?
I mean, I know there are loads. I mean, it's people getting outraged at symbolic behavior or behavior that they read symbolism into. God, that probably happens multiple times a decade, doesn't it? Leave it with me. I'll see if I can come up with one.
The English had a revolution before France, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it depends how you want it. 1688. The Glorious Revolution is maybe
not
referring to
the Glorious Revolution. No, let's not. I'm talking about Henry I, I believe.
1100.
Oh, is it that far back?
Yeah, that was no revolution. Are you talking about 1066, the invasion?
No, didn't they behead someone in like 1640?
Yeah. So that was the Civil War.
Oh, okay. So that was the Civil War. All right.
Yes.
So then, and then you had the Glorious
that was where so that's this very, very interesting period of history in the English-speaking world, because this is the other time that England, that Britain turned into a republic, or a British entity became a republic. Like America being the other one, right? 1776 and all that. But yes, the Brits actually did it in Britain for 11 years. We had an 11-year republic run by Cromwell.
Cromwell.
Yeah. So, which I mean, that's a big topic right there. But yes.
That is.
Yeah, Britain was a republic for 11 years, and then we thought better of that.
And then, so why didn't the French learn from you?
Oh, wow. That's kind of like saying that the question presupposes enough similarity and congruence between the cultures and the polities that there's a reason to expect that they would. Not the case. I mean, for example, all the way through, since basically England was called England, England had a more, dare I say, constitutional, dare I even say consensual monarchy, whereas the French always had an absolutist centralizing monarchy, and the French monarchy, the French king was called the Sun King, as a symbol of that, like very kind of unitary, one thing shining light on everyone. And obviously there were some British kings that thought they wanted some of that, especially the Catholic ones, because France was Catholic, whereas England was Protestant, which is your fundamental cultural division, right? Certainly after. And
then it was Great Britain a connection between those two? The Protestants and the Catholics, or was Great Britain like?
No, so I actually wrote an article. My article about if you want to increase liberty, tell more stories, don't make more arguments. I wrote an article about this, and I pulled forth four historical shifts I looked at to show what they all have in common, where there was a massive historical change that was never reversed, and the first one. I actually used was in the article is Fox's Book of Martyrs. Now, this was the first book that large numbers of people had in their home. And it was only a few decades, this book was written only a few decades after the printing press actually
Send
came
me this
forward.
article so I can link it at the bottom.
I will. And basically, this book was groundbreaking because it had these woodcuts, these illustrations of the killings by Mary, right, Bloody Mary, of the Protestants. She martyred hundreds, thousands of Protestants and wanted to turn England Catholic. And this book, called Fox's Book of Martyrs, it was actually, that's the nickname for the book. It was actually called The Acts and Monuments, by a guy called John, I think, Fox. And so what he did was he essentially mainstreamed, this is the 16th century, he mainstreamed into people's homes, right, in the form of these illustrated books, the evils of Catholic absolutism, or you might say, you know, a Catholic monarch. And that was, the reaction was so great, and it was so huge because no political moral sentiment had ever been mass produced, right, in this case in the form of a book, in a way that people could identify with. Largely, no, some people being illiterate, right, but they could see the pictures, the woodcuts. This was the important thing, first time in history. And after that, Britain could never be Catholic again. And from there on, for centuries, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the avoidance of becoming Catholic was a driving, or let's say reverting to Catholicism, was a driving force in first or second place in British politics, right through up until it was not an issue anymore, probably in the 19th century. And so France, and you know, France was kind of like this model Catholic state, and Britain was going off ever since Mary and the Acts and Monuments was going off in a completely different direction. And France was the foil, was the thing that Britain never wanted to become in so many ways, right? And it started with this terror back in the days of Bloody Mary in the 16th century. So this is all by way of saying you wouldn't expect one country to follow another, only to look at the other. If you're talking about Britain and France, only to look at the other and go, we don't want to be like them. Which maybe is what you meant. I don't know, but
no, I understand. You answered my question. It was in there. So in regards to the whole not standing for the flag, in this instance, it's a private company, but in other instances, conservatives still get upset if people do not stand for the flag, even if it's not a company. How is that going to play out in your opinion? How does this play out? Or does it just stay the same as it has been with people contrary on both sides?
Well, I don't think those parts of human nature that we were talking about earlier that explains why people are getting so upset about what should be a non-issue on both sides. I don't think those parts of human nature are ever going to change, right? So that will always be there. You know, and the other thing is, you know, each side of these highly symbolic issues generally gives, I think, fuel to the fire of the other side by investing it with so much energy, right? Which then invigorates the other side, right? So you get this kind of like positive feedback loop. The more moral indignation on one side, the more the other side has a reason to be morally indignant, you know, in opposition. You know, 'twas ever thus, I think, was ever thus. I have an instinctive reaction to the story as you're telling it to me, but this instinctive reaction may not, you know, isn't in response to all of the facts around it because I don't know all of the facts around it. But I've got to say that one thing that strikes me if you're a football player or you know, a big sports player or a celebrity in the entertainment industry with any degree of success in America is that you have a massive, in some ways, unearned platform to share your views and to influence other people that most people don't have, and that is an awesome privilege, right? And and so it does occur to me that if you want to make a political statement and you've got that platform through no great, not because you're a great political thinker or whatever it may be, but because you can play ball, then there seems to be something a little, what's the right word? I almost want to say spoiled about using the one place where you're going against your employer's wishes to make your point, when you've got all these other places that employment has given you to effectively make the point. But no, you want to do it right here in the face of the people who are giving you, who built you up to this person that anybody's going to pay any attention to in the first place. I find it just a little uncouth. Does that make sense?
It does, and I completely understand your opinion and your natural instinct, and that does make a lot of sense to me. I think that my instinctual opinion is kind of always Thomas Jefferson. It's always, if you're rebelling against authority and you feel like you have a good reason to, then, so from my perspective, I would always stand for the flag. I would always stand for the flag, and I think I always will stand to the flag up until the point that someone tells me I can't not. And that's when if someone told me you have to stand for the flag, I think that's when I wouldn't, because I think that's a
no, but hold on, but it's not. Hold on, but we're conflating things here, because this isn't about you must stand for the flag any more than it's you must show up for the game on time, right? It's part. If it's part of the game, why pull that thing out, right? It kind of assumes the consequence.
You're right. So I guess from his standpoint, it's something that he believes in enough. And do you remember? You remember the first time he didn't stand. So do you know what the issue is that he's?
No, I don't remember the first time he didn't stand because I don't watch sport. But I understand that it was. I kind of saw it because you could, that something was going on, and I understand he was protesting the treatment of African Americans, right, of black people in the United States, and I think with focusing on the police brutality, is that right, or police killings? Is that broadly right?
That sounds about right. I actually didn't know.
Okay, so I mean, I could be wrong, and maybe our viewers will correct me if I am. But let me fill out what I said also, because I know where you're coming from, and I would always say, if there is an evil and there is something you can do to stop it, and you're willing to take all the consequences of your actions to stop it, and you genuinely do believe there's an evil, and you genuinely believe this is going to make a difference, and your motivations are completely pure, at the end of the day, I don't think anything can trump that, right? It certainly is the case that the moral thing to do in certain situations is the thing that you're told not to do, whatever the context of your being told to do or not to do something, right? So, there are no, and this might upset some people, there are no absolutes here, right? Because the right behavior does depend on what you know, whether what you know is right or wrong, right? You can know things incorrectly, right? And what you sincerely believe about the effect you can have on what you know, whether you've examined your own motivations, whether they're pure, and whether you can even tell if they're pure. I mean, there's so many things. So, I mean, I wouldn't sit in judgment of anybody. I mean, as a rule.
Let me tell you, because I live less than a mile, maybe about 1,000 feet from Detroit. So Baltimore, Detroit, Philadelphia. I think that there is systematic racism within the police force for certain big cities. And Detroit, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, I think, are one of them. And this is going to upset both sides, but I really feel it's because Democrats are in charge. of these
Why do you
cities.
say that? Why do you say that?
They feel as if the community there needs help. They feel as if regardless of race, Detroit is a highly black population, but they feel a lot of the Democratic leaders, the Democrats, feel as if these people need health care, they need help, they need because they're less privileged and less fortunate. And because of that, there is more government control, more city control. I feel like the police are more strict. I feel like there is a more there's more force involved, and there's more taking of people's freedoms and trying to control them because they need help because they're less privileged. Whereas I feel like if there was more of a free market, or because people, one of the things, my dad was a Dearborn Heights police officer for 10 years, and his partner was shot and killed on the line of duty in Detroit. And the police system is definitely not efficient or helpful for the situation, because it's considered dangerous, what they do is they crack down on law enforcement, and then people are pulled over for everything. And
You
that
mean
makes
law
it harder.
enforcement cracks down on people, not they crack down on law enforcement, right?
Yes, there's more if you are going 5 miles over the speed limit in Canton, for example, which is a nicer city where I live in, I don't think anyone's going to care. But if you're in Detroit and you look sketchy, and that could mean not necessarily that you're black, but the clothes you wear, or if you're smoking a cigarette, or if you look sketchy and you're doing something, you could get a ticket. And they give tickets for, like, I've seen stuff like, it goes both ways in terms of the immorality, the immoral behavior of the police and the immoral behavior of the citizens. Because I know that in court, if there is a black person that like murdered someone, and the person testifying is white, and you have a jury of people, and the jury is mostly black, they're going to be like, just let this black man go. And even if he like murdered or raped someone, it's there.
We have data on that,
there's
do we?
corruption. What?
We have data on that, do we?
We should, because I didn't.
The black juries are racist, is what you're saying. Do we have data on that? That's amazing. I mean, it's not surprising if it's true, but it's an amazing, it's a huge claim.
Yeah, I would have to get data on it, and I'm not. But I've been told by police officers and my dad, that stuff like that, not that exact instant, but stuff like that does happen because of racial conflict. And also on the opposite end, where there's somebody walking across the street, they're jaywalking, and they have a phone, and then there's civil asset forfeiture. Oh, you're jaywalking, I'm going to take your phone, and you have to pay $300 to get it back, to pay into the police system, which is, they want money because both sides are corrupt. So there is a huge, people, I know Black Lives Matter kind of makes it seem like it's more of a racial issue, but it's more of just a systematic injustice within cities with high crime rates, like Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, those cities. And it is a major problem, especially when people are just trying to get by, trying to live their lives, and they get a $300 ticket. They can't pay that $300 ticket. Right. That ruins the rest of their life.
Yeah, I actually was in I was listening to a panel about this issue at Netroots, the big progressive conference, I think a year ago. And this is an issue that interested me enough that I actually attended this panel. I was there to do something else, but and I asked this question, actually. I asked the question something along the lines of, how can a law enforcement officer with a clear conscience, with any conscience at all, issue a ticket like that for someone they know can't pay it? And in this instance, there was somebody on on the panel a young black man who had been, I guess, arrested for spitting on the sidewalk, and he ended up in jail because of the series of events that happened. So this guy was put in a cage because he spat on a sidewalk, right? And my question was, how can any officer kind of flick the first domino in that chain of causations, knowing that that man is going to be put in a cage, and not think they're committing an act of violence? And psychologically, I find that interesting.
My dad had to quit because he gave people breaks a lot. He said that he wouldn't even pull, and this, he says it still sits morally with him, but he said he wouldn't pull over African-American women because they gave him such a tough time, and they were always screaming, "Why are you stopping me? I ain't doing nothing wrong." And he just felt badly because he could clearly tell by how much they were fighting the ticket that maybe they didn't have enough money to pay it, or they were in a difficult situation, and he didn't feel comfortable giving them tickets. And he got in a lot of trouble because he gave a lot of people breaks. If someone was going 10 over, he wouldn't pull them over, or 5 over. And he says, as a general rule, there's lots of cops who will not pull you over unless you're going 15 or more over. And if they do, they'll write you down for 5. As a general rule, there are a lot of cops that are very fair, and they know what it's like to get a ticket. They know what it's like to be in your situation. They give people breaks. But you have to have a certain amount of tickets. You have to have a certain amount of points in order to keep your job. If you're not keeping up with the amount of points, then you can get fired. And he got into a lot of fights over and over and over with some of the chiefs because he didn't have enough points over and over again. And he said, look, I've pulled people over. I've gave people warnings. I've been doing my job. I haven't been just sitting out in a police car taking a nap. I've been doing my job, but I'm not morally able to give people some of these tickets. And he eventually had to quit.
Interesting.
Because he just didn't feel morally he couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Is that a good ending for this episode?
I mean, here we are again. We've opened a really big topic, right? And yeah. And if I mean, it's almost like it's almost a time to start another episode, isn't it? But but for us to do that, I'd want to be looking at loads of relevant data that I don't have in my head. Right. But yeah, no, interesting. That's kind of good for your dad.
Right? Yeah, my dad could be. I've told my dad, like, maybe you should run for office in Detroit.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow. Yeah. Maybe we should stop there.
And we'll have another episode. Thank you for watching No Occasion to Shout. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
Absolutely. Thanks, Austin.
Thanks, Robin.